All right, let's dive right in. We're taking a close look today at a biological mechanism that is, honestly, almost universally misunderstood. We all tend to think of stress as the ultimate enemy, right? Like it's this modern disease we just need to eradicate. But here's the wild truth. Stress was actually beautifully designed. It's a hardcore evolutionary survival mechanism meant to keep us alive. It sharpens your focus, pumps energy right into your muscles, and preps you to handle immediate danger. The problem? Well, in our modern lives, this brilliant survival tool essentially goes rogue. Picture this. Acute stress is kind of like a quick, passing storm. It rolls in, the thunder claps, your attention gets laser sharp, your reaction speed way up, and you deal with whatever the threat is. But then, the storm clears. Chronic stress, on the other hand, is what happens when that storm just never leaves. It becomes the permanent climate you're living in every single day. The warning siren literally never turns off, and that is exactly where the damage to our bodies begins. So, to really demystify how this permanent weather wreaks havoc on us, here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to look at what stress actually is, check out the general adaptation syndrome, compare acute versus chronic stress, dive into the immune system, look at the systemic and cardiovascular effects, and wrap up with how to actually manage your stress load. Okay, kicking things off with part one. What is stress? Let's look at the biological design of pressure. Back in 1936, there was this endocrinologist named Hans Selye, who's pretty much known today as the father of stress research. He was observing patients who had completely different diseases. We're talking tuberculosis, severe burns, cancer, totally different things. But he noticed they all shared this very similar general sickly appearance. They all looked the same way under intense physical pressure. Selye actually borrowed the term stress straight out of physics, where it describes the interaction between a force and the resistance to that force. He defined biological stress as the nonspecific response of the body to any demand. It didn't even matter what the specific threat was, the body's fundamental alarm bell rang the exact same way. Which brings us perfectly to part two, the general adaptation syndrome, or how the body actually reacts. Selye's really groundbreaking discovery was that he could actually map out this universal physical response into three distinct steps. First up, you have the alarm reaction. This is where adrenaline just floods your system, firing up the sympathetic nervous system, your classic fight or flight mode. Next comes the stage of resistance. If the stressor doesn't go away, your body tries to adapt, right? It pumps out prolonged levels of cortisol just to keep your energy up to fight the ongoing battle. But what if that battle never ends? You hit step three, the stage of exhaustion. This is where your biological resources are entirely wiped out, your adaptation energy runs completely dry, and physical breakdown begins. Let's dig into that difference in part three, acute versus chronic stress, eustress versus distress. Fun fact, Selye actually had a word for good stress. He called it eustress. This is acute stress. It's short, it's intense, and it's tied to a specific event, like a massive looming deadline at work or a sudden physical challenge. It temporarily boosts your performance, and crucially, once the event is over, your nervous system gets to reset. But chronic stress, or distress, is an accumulation of ongoing pressures. Think financial worries, a super toxic workplace, caregiving, things that never fully switch off. Because your body stays in this state of prolonged physiological activation, you develop what's called an allostatic load. It's a constant, grinding wear and tear that continuously drains your adaptation energy. So, how does this affect our defenses? Part 4. Stress and immune function. A massive double-edged sword. If you look at this table, the contrast is crazy. Under acute stress, a quick burst of activation via your HPA axis, which is basically your brain's central alarm system, actually makes your immune system stronger. It mobilizes natural killer cells and leukocytes, pushing them into the bloodstream to prepare for potential injury. It's an incredible defense mechanism. But prolonged exposure to cortisol? Total opposite. It severely suppresses your B cells, killing your body's ability to produce antibodies. Plus, it creates a sustained harmful inflammatory state by elevating inflammatory proteins like IL-6. This is exactly why people under long-term pressure catch every bug going around. And strangely, it's why you often get a terrible cold the exact moment you finally go on vacation. Your body was holding back the exhaustion, and as soon as the pressure drops, your totally weakened immune system just gives out. And the damage definitely doesn't stop at the immune system. Part 5, systemic and cardiovascular effects, the hidden wear and tear. The systemic toll that chronic stress takes on the human body is, frankly, terrifying. First, cardiovascularly. Stress hormones literally force your heart to work overtime, causing vasoconstriction, keeping blood pressure high, and even increasing the risk of thrombosis or blood clots. Down in the gut, because your body thinks you're in a literal war zone, it actively diverts blood away from digestion. It starves the gut-brain axis, which severely worsens conditions like IBS. For women, the hormonal disruption is massive. Prolonged stress derails thyroid function and menstrual cycles. And neurologically, your brain structure actually changes. The amygdala, your brain's threat detection center, becomes hypersensitized, while the prefrontal cortex, which handles logic and calm, basically goes offline to conserve energy. This leads to profound emotional numbing and fatigue. You don't just feel tired, your entire system is fundamentally exhausted. So, how do we fix this before we break down completely? Part 6. Managing your stress load and balancing the equation. The solution actually comes down to a very elegant, simple formula. Stress equals pressure divided by resilience. Really think about that for a second. Pressure is everything pressing down on you from the outside. Your workload, the constant emails, relationships, financial burdens. Resilience, on the bottom half of that equation, is your internal capacity to absorb, process, and recover from that pressure. Look, we can't all just quit our jobs and move to the woods to lower our stress, right? The good news is you change the math by actively increasing your resilience. When your resilience grows faster than the pressure, your overall stress falls. You do this by intentionally activating your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode. We're talking engaging in regular physical activity to physically burn off that adrenaline, prioritizing really consistent sleep to normalize those toxic cortisol levels, scheduling structured downtime, and utilizing therapy or psychological support. You're actively training your biology to return to its baseline. To sum this all up, there's this great thought. Chronic stress is what happens when you have been carrying high pressure for long enough that your resilience starts to deplete rather than grow. Chronic stress is, at its absolute core, a failure of recovery. It happens when your body simply forgets how to reset after a really brutal week. And that feeling of permanent, bone-deep exhaustion tricks you into believing that this is just what life feels like now. But I promise you, it absolutely doesn't have to be. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on. Is your resilience growing faster than the pressure is rising? I'd love for you to evaluate your own stress equation today. Are you just focusing all your energy on the storm outside, or are you actively building the shelter you need to weather it? Take an active step today to reset that nervous system, build your resilience, and step out of the permanent storm. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.